Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by an individual who started his career in talent acquisition on the agency side before shifting his focus in-house, helping organizations build and refine hiring strategies and processes. Since 2021, he's been supporting companies from high-growth teams at Cinch to the more established cooperative bank here in the UK. Not only sourcing the top talents, but optimizing, like I said, processes, workflows, tools, and evolving more towards what we now focus on as talent operations. Now, with his experience and insights, he's here to guide us through the future of talent acquisition and what it means for us, for the business, for the talent space when we talk about TAOps. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, talent acquisition specialist Josh Wingate. So thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eden. It's a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Look, before we dive into TAOps and all that good stuff, Josh, I want to scale it back. I'm a big fan of just really peeling back into teams in general. And if you've listened to some of our episodes, you probably know what question's coming up. So from your perspective, Josh, what do you feel makes a high-performing recruitment team in this current market?
I think from my perspective, I think I'll touch on this in a bit probably, but I think it's important for us to be as agile as possible. I think like what makes a high performing team, in my opinion, is like, if the recruitment market it changes every 5 minutes, right? As we all know. 1 minute, you're in a hiring boom, and then there's like what we're in at the moment where it's like very candidate driven. There's a lot of redundancies happening. There's a lot of like difficult stories that we hear a lot. So being able to navigate that and kind of ride that wave a little bit and be agile and change with the times and improve your processes in that way, I think that's what makes a high performing team more than anything.
Being flexible to what's happening around you, not getting stung by lawsuits. Hint, hint. Workday.
Yeah, that's
I'm
definitely one that's happening.
I think this is going to come up as we talk about TAOps in general, because I think that's probably a big story. I mean, from when we're recording this. But when we talk about TAOps, then I've heard it a few times.
Mhm.
I've seen it a few times. But just for those that maybe aren't familiar with the phrase or what it is, in layman's term, what exactly do you mean when we say talent acquisition operations?
So for me, it encompasses a number of different things. And when it comes to it's more about the how we do things rather than like the why or the when we do things. So it's a lot of encompassing everything that touches on the recruitment world. So whether that's tools and systems that we use, whether that's looking at how teams are best enabled to do their
Hmm?
job, like taking into account data and using that to inform strategy. Process improvement is like a huge one that I've been grateful to be a part of throughout the stuff that I've done. And it's done a lot where I think if you look at like kind of programs of hiring, so whether that's like early careers or, you're doing some work around diversity and inclusion, I think recruitment ops is a great way. You might be doing it without even realizing it sometimes, where
Mm.
you look at things and sort of say, right, how are we doing things, but also how could they be better?
Mhm.
So yeah.
So not just the process of I'm going to go and find people, that's my job, but it's not that, it's everything but that part. It's how am I doing my job? How can I improve my job or processes around me?
Yeah, 100%. I think traditionally, I think if you flash back like a number of years, or often is still the case with small recruitment teams, a lot of this ownership with TA ops falls on the like head of or director of.
Mm.
So it's a big part of their responsibility, to look at the strategy and things. And but I think as the times are changing and candidates are being more selective, and companies need to think more about the how they attract the best talent rather than the when and that kind of thing. I think if even everyone in the team should be looking at this kind of stuff and being curious and asking
Yeah.
constantly, why are we doing this, or how could things be better? I think that's what, again, alluding to the fact that that's, in my opinion, what makes a high performing team for sure.
Why is it important then? You're right. I mean, I think you're right, but why is it important from the sense of where it used to be down to the ownership of director, head of, whoever, right, in a TA function? Why is it important for us in our own careers to be mindful of the operations happening around us?
So I think if you're like looking at this stuff constantly, I think that makes like you as a person as a better recruiter, in my opinion, because
Mm.
Um, as I said, you need to be as agile as possible. You need to change with the times, and you need to look at what other companies are doing, what other teams are doing, and asking, right, okay, well, they're doing it this way. How could we do that? Because that sounds like a really interesting idea. I think for our careers in the recruitment world, I think that's a really important skill to have because no slight to those that are there to I know that people do want to just focus on the day to day. They want to fill jobs, and that's all they kind of want to do, and that's fine. They might not see their career going up that like step up and going into a head of or a leadership role. But even if you're in that space, like thinking about the right, okay, well, how am I going to attract the best talent constantly? How am I going to nurture talent pools? How are we going to is our process as efficient as possible so that when I find these people, we're going to get them through the door as quickly and as, give them as a great experience as possible. I think if you're asking those questions, you're going to be a great recruiter, in my opinion, and you're going to help the business grow as effectively as possible, really.
I also, on the point of being, like stepping up and not going down the leadership route, I know some of the best recruiters, principal recruiters, they do this day in, day out.
Yeah.
And they're like the eyes and the ears of where the leader cannot see. And like they're in the nitty gritty. And that's when you get a really good principal or staff and a leader, and they're in sync with each other. And they're talking about this sort of stuff, and they create a structure behind them where, you or I would feel comfortable to say, look, we need to improve this. Linking back to that first question, that's where high performance really steps up a gear. When did you start noticing a difference in the industry? Because your background, so you started on my side of the fence, the agency side, then obviously transitioned in-house. You've got what, 6-ish years of total experience now. So you've gone through a decent wave of COVID, post-COVID boom, post-COVID depression, shall we say, and where we are now. So you've gone through like all emotions that I've experienced in the 12 years that I've done this in a very short period of time. So when did you start seeing more conversations around TAOps or the verbiage used here and people taking a bit more of an interest here?
I think it was definitely kind of post pandemic. I started to see it a little bit more. I think because it was a massive shift for the industry. Like a lot of my experiences in the tech space, so that like COVID was a great time for that because everyone was hiring software developers and recruitment was there's tons of jobs going, all that kind of stuff. And I think teams started to become a little bit less reactive to things and they became a bit more strategic in their approach because it was just so competitive. So you started to see teams think about like how to attract best talent and their processes and reviewing that a bit more, at least more publicly, doing things like that. In our space, I started to go to events and seeing people talk about like process improvement. I led talks and things on like applying agile methodology from tech and taking that into TA and how we can do all that. So that's been an interesting shift. But I think it's still like small teams, especially, like can still be really reactive to the way the market is and the way businesses are going at the moment and the economy and all that kind of stuff, which I'm definitely by no means an expert in. But I still think people are asking the how and the right questions a little bit more frequently because the market is still very much candidate driven. Candidates are more informed than ever. They're very much aware of some of the bad practices that do happen or they have been through when it comes to interview processes and that kind of thing. So companies need to be thinking about the how they attract a little bit more carefully. So I think TA teams have become more aware of that in the last few years, especially. I've started to see like roles within teams where this is the sole kind of job responsibility. So they'll sit within a team.
So changing the actual structure of the TA org itself and giving space for someone to focus purely on this.
Yeah, I think it happens much more in bigger teams because, of course, like if you're a very small team, you're kind of stuck in the weeds with the day-to-day recruitment a little bit more. But yeah, in bigger teams, I see roles where it's like either a head of TAOps or recruitment operations specialist, and that kind of thing is becoming a bit more common because, as I said, tier leadership as a role is very stretched as it is. Like, you've got to look at all the strategic stuff, but also you've got to deal with senior stakeholders in a business. You've got to worry about the team well-being and doing one-to-ones and all that kind of thing. So it's a lot for one person to have on their shoulders. So having someone where their sole focus is to question things and be that person in the room to say, well, okay, well, how do we do things better? How to improve things? Or, keep their finger on the pulse of what other companies are doing and say, well, why don't we try this? Having that person constantly question things, I think, for me anyway, it's gotten me really motivated because I think it's easy to just get stuck in the day-to-day of filling jobs and that kind of thing. Whereas something like this really like gives me like a shot of adrenaline, like, oh, we could change things and we could make things better for the candidate and for us as well. So it's a really interesting space. So it's nice to see that's being talked about more, and there are roles in that space, which I think is really interesting and really exciting. So
You just said the phrase there, having someone to keep a pulse on like the market and the competitors and things like that. I guess this is now kind of coming into the rote of how do we actually start adopting this TA mindset?
mhm.
How would you kind of go about and analyzing a competitor's process, or you know, from that perspective? Because yeah, I'm just curious. Without running an interview process with them directly, how are you going to start peeling back what they're doing?
So I think for me, it all started when I was at Cinch. We were recruiting an insane amount, and we were seen as like, especially in Manchester in the northwest, where our head office was. When it comes to the tech talent, we were seen as like the company that's stealing everybody else because we were just taking on so many people, which was a great, a great kind of reputation to have, I suppose, in a way.
I mean, if you're
But
scaling, you've got the funds to, then more for it.
exactly. But instead of, I went to an event where I was sat at a table with the TA folk from specifically businesses that I'd personally had stolen talent from. So I
Okay.
was worried that my food was going
Was
to
your
get.
name badge with Cinch there as well?
It was, unfortunately. So I was like, oh
Oh
God,
wow.
I'm going
So
to
you've got
get
the
like.
like, so they've got the burning cross towards you, and
That's what it felt like going in. But then when we actually got to talking and we got through the jokes, like, it was met with, oh, you're the guy from Cinch, like, how are you stealing everybody and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not here to toot my own horn about that. But when we got to talking, we found that we all had, like, we were still having the same problems, whether it's, salaries were still kind of tough, or, how do we attract diverse talent in tech, which is obviously still a big thing. And, so I started to learn from others and collaborate and sort of say, right, okay, well, even though since you're doing great and we're taking on a great amount of people in a short space of time, there's still things we could do better. So for me, I think how do we adopt this TAOps mindset is like be as present with the kind of industry as possible. And even though you might see other companies and other TA teams as like your competitors, so to speak, collaborate with them, ask some questions, like even make a joke out of it and sort of saying, you're taking on like loads of people at the minute, you're stealing all of our employees. How are you doing it? What are you doing differently that we're not?
yeah,
And you'll actually probably find that you'll learn quite a lot, because if you're in your own bubble and you think just about how your company does things or just about how your teams do things, you're missing out on some great knowledge, some great ideas. There are some people out there and some TA folk that I know that are doing some really like interesting stuff that's very different or considered like the not the norm. And
yeah.
that's quite interesting stuff to have, so that when you get to that point where you're reviewing your own processes, you think, oh well, actually I saw that this person at this company is trialing this, why don't we give that a go, because it seems to be working for them. So I think that's how we adopt it, and just keep being curious, keep collaborating with people. Like, we're all in the same kind of recruitment industry, so yes, we're competing for the same talent in a way, but at the same time, we're all in this together, kind of thing.
I think that's why, I'll be honest with you, I love the podcast so much, because
Yeah.
I get to see firsthand where people collaborate. And since doing and starting this, I've not met someone who's not willing to at least speak to me and share ideas if they've got time. Some people just simply don't have capacity and time. That's totally fine. But like the vast majority, like even if it's not joining me as an actual guest, they'll just send me some information about what they're seeing, what I'm seeing, and that we're breaking down. I said to you before, in fact, about the us versus them mentality between internal and external. But even between internal teams, yeah, you might work for company A and company B, and you can compete in, but you can still learn from each other. So I really like the fact that it almost sounded like, and don't want to, I don't want to downplay what you do, but it sounds like almost like you kind of fell into learning about TAOps purely just by going to this event and starting and igniting the conversation from there. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think so. I think part of it goes like, because I worked in the tech space, I'm quite a techie geeky guy anyway. So like I loved being a fly on the wall of like how they do things. And I started to learn a lot about agile methodology, and they're like the continuous improvement is like a huge thing for that. I mean, look at a role like DevOps, right? DevOps is very similar to recruitment ops in a way that why that role existed originally, and being that person to improve things. So I was like, well, this is a great way of doing things for this team and how they improve processes and stuff. Like, why don't we start doing, that with TA? Like, what's the difference really, apart from the subject matter? So even when I've like led process improvement workshops and stuff, which I did at Cinch, and I've done a couple of other businesses since, the way I did it was doing like a retrospective style like workshop
Yeah.
and applying that agile methodology. And so I did kind of fall into it, I suppose, and by studying agile methodology and then kind of being like, oh yeah, there's actually quite a link to what they do and what I want to do. I want to improve things constantly, and as I said before, that motivates me, that gets me energized, and I feel good about being the person in the room that sort of says to the team, like, we can make this better, like, let's give this a go. So yeah.
Well, let's peel it back, right? Because I think regardless of us doing it knowingly or doing it unknowingly, as you kind of rightly said, a lot of us are doing TAOps in some degree. But let's put a bit of meat to it, if that's cool, and understand where you've actually done it, and hopefully kind of give some examples to people. Say, look, if you're not sure of where you can do it today, or if you are doing it, then maybe your examples can kind of help bring some structure to someone, and hopefully come away from the conversation with something, one or two things to try. So I guess from your experience, you mentioned Cinch a few times. You mentioned process, so I'm guessing we did a lot of process related stuff. Okay, let's talk about that then. So I guess run me through a little bit about some of the projects that you'd worked on where TAOps was the driver behind it. I guess where you started, where you finished, and the lessons in between.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest like example of this where I first kind of took ownership of something like this was as the TA team grew, I became the person that looked after all of tech. I became the person that looked after specifically like product and design, because those were areas of the business where I was really passionate. Like, I studied product design like in my spare time. So I was like, this is really cool. I want to do this. But by that point, the software engineering department was a bit of a well-oiled machine, so to speak. Like, this, obviously it still wasn't perfect, but there was, their processes were very clearly outlined. We had a process that worked, and we had a good time to hire and good candidate feedback and all that kind of stuff. Whereas product and the design teams didn't really have as well like defined process as that. The time to hire was a bit higher. The candidate feedback wasn't as positive in some spaces with certain themes. So I was like, right, okay, well, I can move over and look after these departments and really kind of put my stamp on it a little bit. So we did probably about 6 months worth of hiring. And I felt at that point it was a good time to, right, let's try this out. Let's try some agile methodology, because it's speaking their language anyway, so they were dead up for it. So I took the leadership and created a workshop, a retrospective, and I said, right, let's look at the last 6 months of hiring, and let's identify what's working well, like collect that good feedback from both candidates and the hiring community as well, and everyone that's involved in that process.
Sorry, when you say hiring community, what do you mean? Sorry.
So that's, to me, it's like hiring touches on not just hiring managers and the recruitment team, but also everyone who's involved in that process. So it might be
Okay.
people
So
in the
interviewers, everyone,
yeah,
the whole shebang.
yeah, exactly.
On that, sorry, I know I might have jumped the gun here. Are you also incorporating those who are in maybe the HR department, who might be offering, or who are auditing the offers, who are doing the legal side, the contract? You're getting every single person who's going to touch Eden at some point in this process. That's your community.
Pretty much, yeah. Anyone
Okay.
that's involved in the process, and yeah, you're right. It does involve the people team. So I was that kind of representative in that room for that session, if you like. So I had the feedback from finance where they were saying, okay, your salary bandings might not be here, or that kind of feedback I brought to the table from that side. So yeah, taking all that feedback, celebrating what's been working, what's going great, but also identifying, right, okay, what do we think we should change? Blue sky thinking, nothing's off the table, no idea is a bad one. Let's just all get our shared collective thoughts out on the table. And it was a great long session. I think we ran it for like a couple of hours, but it was all filled with really, really important good stuff. And from there, we identified, it basically fed into the roadmap of what I wanted to go ahead after for the next 6 months. So we sort of identified, right, okay, this is all the stuff we want to change, because we've identified that it's not quite working the way we want to. So from there, we identified, did a bit of impact mapping. So we sort of identified, right, okay, this stuff is the low effort to change. It's quite a quick win, but it's going to bring the most value for candidates or for the hiring community. So let's tackle that first and then work through the list that way. So that was a great
You
kind of
didn't do the hardest first. You didn't do eat the frog first. You started with low impact, low effort, high impact.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where if something's not going to bring us that much return on investment in terms of whether it's candidate experience or whether that's experience from our side as well, if it's not going to bring us that much of a better thing, and it's also really hard to implement, whether it's changing a company policy or something like that, where we know it's going to be a bit more of an uphill battle. Let's tackle that later because it's not going to bring us the most value quickly. Again, it goes back to that, like, you have to be agile. It's kind of sentiment, like, this is what we can change really quickly and what we'll see a positive impact. So, and I think that then motivates you for tackling the stuff later down the roadmap as well, because you can already say, well, within a couple of weeks we changed our interview process slightly and we're seeing an increased time in process or a decrease in
Like
time.
you've got credits,
Yeah,
credits to go to the board to say, look, we've done this, this, and this, but now if we do this, it will get to that.
Yeah, 100%. It's just a way to motivate the team and also showcase us as TA as that real, like, partnership mentality. Because I've always been an advocate for seeing, like, recruitment isn't there to just fill jobs for teams. Like, we're there to be a hiring partner. So almost like, I think, how external agencies really want to work, right? You want to really partner with your clients and get embedded and get into the nitty-gritty. And I think the hiring managers I've worked with, the feedback I've had on sessions like that, where it's like, oh, you really understand, like, what we're about, what we're looking for in talent. Like, you understand also from, like I said, from the tech world, because I was doing it in a way they understood with that retrospective workshop style. They were like, oh, you really get it. And I think that gave them confidence that when I speak to candidates, I was going to represent them in the best way possible as much as I could. So yeah, I think it's really, really valuable.
How do you determine the return on investment on an action?
I think it depends on the action. So I think, for something like that, where it's process improvement, we looked at things like, getting feedback quite a lot. So at various different stages, we were asking candidates for feedback, not just ones that were successful, ones that were unsuccessful, ones that got about halfway through the process and didn't quite make it, like constantly checking in with them and taking that feedback and just being brutally honest with them and sort of saying, right, if you could change anything, what would you change? And okay, let's take that on board, because if you're being authentic with candidates and sort of saying, right, okay, we might not have it all, we're not perfect, we know that, like, this thing needs to change and we're looking into that, how would you influence that if you could change anything? And I think a lot of candidates are receptive of that. I think candidates want a load of companies to have great recruitment experiences for all. I don't think anyone's really of the mindset of, like, keeping their thoughts to themselves about that kind of stuff. We see it a lot on, like, now, where it's like people post a TikTok about a really bad interview experience they had, and, like, they'll get loads of comments being like, oh, me too. And I think people come together over stuff like that. So I think the companies that are asking those questions and taking that on board, I think that's the most important metric for me. But, for something like that, you might go into a workshop thinking, right, okay, our process is 60 days long. We can't be having that. This is from, like, signing off the role to onboarding. We need to improve this. So okay, so let's use that from a specific lens. So I've also done, when I was at a company called X Design, they're now called Create Future. I did a similar workshop, but where we as a recruitment team looked at the end-to-end process for all departments, but specifically through a diversity and inclusion lens, because we knew that we wanted to. The company was, it was great. It was people first, all that kind of good stuff. But there's always improvements that could be made in that space. So I said, right, okay, this is something I've done previously at Cinch, but let's apply it to diversity and inclusion. So we looked at our end-to-end process, did the same stuff, collected feedback, identified things, and got together a bit of a roadmap of what to tackle next. So the metrics for that will be slightly different, because if we want to, it's easy for tech teams to say, oh, we want to attract like a more diverse, like, gender base in terms of the candidates we attract. That's often a big one. Or we want to tackle things, like I said, long process and that kind of thing. Then you take your metrics from that and you go into the session. But it's also, when you're doing a workshop like that, it's important to have, like, a facilitator to keep the team on track, because especially when you're doing blue sky thinking, everyone's got loads of great ideas, but it might take you off on a tangent of, oh, let's reevaluate our entire EVP and also do a load of salary banding exercises. And it's like, right, okay, well, that's not why we came to the room. We know that's going to be a lot more long term, so let's tackle this bit first and then work through that, because otherwise it's just going to be really daunting, especially when you're dealing with something like diversity and inclusion. Like a lot of people are scared of it because it's such a big topic and it encompasses so many different things. But if you say, right, okay, well, we're not attracting candidates from this specific demographic. Okay, let's look at our process, what we're doing, how we're attracting those in the first place, and doing it that way, and you've got your metrics there.
Do you feel, and I guess there's no right or wrong answer because I've had polar opposite answers to a similar question from two different people at like a year apart in this podcast now. But we're talking about project work, right? We've got recruitment and then we've got project work, and TAOps kind of falls under project work.
Yeah.
Do you fear? No, I put a word in your mouth. Let me retract that. Do you feel? There we go. Not fear. No, I said that one, everyone. Do you feel that by having everyone do project work or think about project work or TAOps, so everyone, not just the leader, do you feel that that could then lead the team to want to focus on that side first, because that's the fun part, than sitting on LinkedIn or calling through cold call lists? Yes, by the way, internal teams should be calling through cold call lists. That's a different story, in my opinion. You should have a cold call list of past applicants that you have access to. If they're not doing it, it's a big, big miss. Anyways, and that's the part where maybe some internal people are not happy with. They don't like it as much. They like the process. They like doing the offers at the end. Of course, we all do. That sometimes that initial part, you're like, and I get it sometimes as well, and that is my job 90% of the time, right? So I get it. Do you feel like that we could somewhat lean more towards project work, and we lose what makes us what our job is, which is finding shit hot people for our jobs, and that's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because I've actually been asked a similar sort of question in an interview where it's like they've been trying to determine like whether or not, like in terms of my personal preference and my personal balance, and whether or not I enjoy the project side a little bit too much and not enough the delivery side. But I think it goes down to everybody's different. Not everybody's going to want to like care about this stuff as much, or like take the time to sit and do like a 2-hour workshop to improve things, and that's, I totally get that. I think it's about finding that balance. I think teams are often in the rut of, let's review everything at once a year when we get everyone in the office and a big whiteboard, and like that's great. That's a great session to like look at the year ahead or the year you've had previously. I've seen teams do that often, like smaller teams where they've not, like I said, they don't have capacity to look at this stuff more often. That's fine if that works for you. But like I said, if you're doing it once a year, you might fall by the wayside in terms of what cool companies are doing to attract the best talent. And you then, when it, if a company, we've seen how quick the market moves, right? If you're a consultancy, for example, and you land a big client with a big project and it's crap, we need to hire 100 people. If you've not thought about the how you're going to do that and more just the when you're going to do that, then you're already on the back foot and you're already like, well, crap, how do we deal with that many vacancies? And how are we going to do, like, what our process? It's way too long. We can't hire 100 people in this amount of time if with that process. And then all of a sudden you're at a disadvantage. Then I feel so. It's a tricky one. It is all about balance because at the end of the day, our biggest responsibility in our job is to find great people and fill those jobs. But again, you've got to be thinking about how you're doing that, even if it's like a little increments or just little changes here and there. I think that's still just as powerful sometimes as doing like 2-hour workshops and stuff. I'm not saying that'll work for everybody because it just won't. It won't work for every business. It won't work for every team. But still, like having that mentality of, okay, yeah, we could change things with better, or just having that self-awareness, I suppose, is really important. Because if you're stuck in the weeds thinking that your process is fantastic and all of a sudden you find out in a bad way that it's not, then you're gonna be a bit.
Reviews are killing you, or
Exactly.
the Glassdoor.
It's like you've not looked at Glassdoor in a year, and all of a sudden you find that candidates are absolutely raving a red flag everywhere for you, and that's impacting your employer brand. So there's lots of ways to think about it, but to go back to your question, like I said, I think it's all about balance and just, even if it's little increments, think about this stuff because it will pay off in the long run. But yeah, don't forget about your delivery, of course.
I think realistically, a lot of the leaders that would listen to this will probably be sitting there going, okay, yeah, like we're thinking about it, we're doing it, or we're about to start doing more of this, and they're probably in that mindset already. But obviously, it's the individual contributors, it's you and I that are kind of getting more into it or doing more of it. but it can be daunting. I think sometimes when you're trying to balance both sides of it together, and maybe you're supported, maybe you're not supported, maybe you have a mentor, maybe you don't, someone that you can lean on around this. So what are some really easy first steps that, say I'm in a position, I'm listening and going, I like this. This sounds interesting. I think I'm doing it, but I kind of want to lean into it a little bit more. What are some really easy steps I can probably implement today and kind of review 6 months from now?
I think it's something like, I think that impact mapping that mentioned earlier, I think that's really useful, where it's you pick something where you've been wanting to change it for ages. You know it's actually not going to be that much of an uphill battle to change. So let's just focus on that. Nothing else. Let's not
Mhm.
try and change the world when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and or let's not try and be the company with the max Glassdoor score or anything like that. Let's just, okay, we've been having this problem for a little bit, and that little bit might be a week, might be a month, might be a couple of months, and you've just put it to the back of your mind and not thought about it. But you know that if you just had the time or just had the focus to just think about only that for a little bit and how you can improve that, I think that, and you'll get that win, and you'll think that felt good. And at least for me, that's been the stuff that's where it's been like, I've changed that. That makes me feel really good. I want to change something else, and I want to improve something else. That gives me the motivation to kind of tackle other stuff. Like I said, when I did the diversity and inclusion workshop, it's a huge topic, and everyone's really scared of it because it's so huge. But it's like, right, okay, well, for example, at the time we were doing a load of gender pay gap reporting, so it's like, right, okay, well, let's think about specifically this because we need to report on that pretty soon, and we need to talk about our actions as a recruitment team in the report about what we're doing to improve things. So let's focus on that for a little bit, and we changed that and we influenced that, and we felt really good about that. We didn't solve all the business's problems within that workshop, and we were never going to. But it gave us that motivation that that felt good to change. Let's work on that first. So don't try and
Snowball effect, the kind of next thing, so on and so forth.
yeah, exactly. Don't try and change the world. Just focus on what you can influence, what you can change, what you want to change. The stuff that's the lowest effort but the highest reward. Focus on that first would be my advice.
Nice. Josh, if anyone wants to take this further with you, learn a little bit more about who you are, your career, what you can bring to the table, where can they find you?
I think everyone on this podcast has probably said LinkedIn because it's
Yeah.
unfortunately where we all have to be as recruiters. I think if I wasn't in recruitment, I wouldn't touch LinkedIn with a 10-foot punch ball.
I didn't even know I didn't know it was a platform before I became a recruiter. My brother told me about it, and when do you use LinkedIn? I'm like, no, at that point I worked in hospitality. I was like, what's LinkedIn?
Exactly,
And
yeah.
then now I
That's
live on it.
and I never heard of it either. So yeah, but yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. I'm quite collaborative, so I really enjoy. I hope that's came across that I really enjoy like idea sharing and that kind of thing, and learning from others and stuff. So happy to talk to literally anybody about that because everyone's got great ideas and helps keep me motivated. When times are a little hard in the TA world. So
I appreciate you spending time, and I think TAOps. I think you've hit the nail on the head so much often in this. I didn't have to really share much because I genuinely agree with everything you've just shared there. I think it's an everyone task. We can all do little steps to do it, and most of us, if not all of us, are doing this already in some capacity, be it internal, external, RPO, embedded, whatever you want to call. Everyone is doing parts of this. So I really appreciate you sharing and being very specific with your examples, and hopefully, like I said, people come away from it. But thank you so much for joining, and it's been a pleasure.
yeah, thanks Eden for the opportunity, and yeah, hopefully people take something away from this, and my ramblings make sense to somebody.
I appreciate it, Josh. Have a good one.
Thanks Eden, you too.